I missed my sister's wedding for a life-saving surgery. My family disowned me. My name is Claire. I'm 31 years old, and I live in Portland with a rescue cat named Wren and a window full of herbs I actually remember to water. My life is quiet now, peaceful. And if you told me 5 years ago I'd feel this way, I wouldn't have believed you, because 5 years ago, my entire family stopped speaking to me on the same day surgeons held my heart in their hands. They called me selfish, said I ruined everything. My mother told me, while I was still learning to breathe normally again, that she was ashamed to call me her daughter. All because I didn't make it to my sister's wedding. I know what you're thinking. There has to be more to this. There has to be some part where I could have chosen differently. I used to think that too. I spent a long time in hospital beds turning it over, wondering if I could have pushed things back just 3 weeks. But here is what I need you to understand before anything else. My cardiologist told me that if I had waited those 3 weeks, I very likely would not be here. My family knew that. They knew it, and they still chose the wedding. This is the story of how I stopped apologizing for surviving. My parents, David and Rosemary, built their whole identity around appearances. Dad was mid-level management at an insurance company. Mom was the kind of woman who sent handwritten thank you notes for thank you notes. They cared deeply, sincerely, even about what the neighbors thought, what the church congregation thought, what extended family thought at Christmas. Not bad people. Just people who had confused performance with love for so long that they didn't know the difference anymore. Then there was my sister, Natalie. Natalie is 3 years older than me, and she has always been, there is simply no other word for it, the golden one. Prettier. Socially effortless. The one who made friends without trying and got attention without asking. Mom used to braid her hair before school and call her my little princess, while I sat at the kitchen table eating cereal alone. I'm not saying my parents didn't love me. I'm saying love in our house had a hierarchy, and I was not at the top of it. My role was the capable one, the responsible one, the one who didn't need as much. When Dad lost his job the year I was 16, I quietly took on more chores, babysat on weekends to have my own money, and stopped asking for anything because I had learned, gradually and completely, that asking cost more than it was worth. Natalie got her college tuition fully covered. I got a loan and a firm handshake. When I was 24, I was diagnosed with hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. It's a thickening of the heart muscle that can, in serious cases, obstruct blood flow and cause sudden cardiac events. Mine was on the more serious end of the spectrum. My cardiologist, Dr. Lena Park, monitored me closely for 2 years before we began discussing intervention. I managed it with medication, lifestyle changes, and quarterly scans. I told my family. They said they were sorry to hear it, and then the conversation moved on to whatever Natalie was doing that month. That's the important part. My illness was not a secret. It was just never treated as something that mattered very much. The first time I truly understood how bad things had gotten, I was 26, driving home from a scary cardiology appointment. Dr. Park had found changes in my latest scan, nothing requiring immediate action, but enough to move my checkups from every 3 months to every 6 weeks. I called my mom on the drive home. I needed to hear her voice. I needed someone to tell me it was going to be okay. She answered on the 3rd ring. I told her about the appointment, the scan, how frightened I was. "Oh, honey," she said, and for 1 second I thought I was going to get what I needed. That is stressful. "Hey, did Natalie tell you she got engaged?" I sat in that parking lot for 20 minutes after I hung up. I didn't cry. I just sat there. That was the beginning. Over the next 2 years, as Natalie's engagement took over the entire gravitational center of our family, I became increasingly invisible. Every family dinner turned into a wedding planning session. Every phone call opened with venue updates and florist drama. When I mentioned once that my medication wasn't managing my symptoms as well as it used to, Mom said, "We'll talk about that after the wedding, Claire. We have so much on our plate right now." After the wedding, as if my heart could just wait patiently in line. Then came the bachelorette weekend. Natalie's maid of honor, her college roommate Bree, had organized a trip to Savannah. I was a bridesmaid, and I was invited. But that particular weekend was when I had a scheduled cardiac stress test, booked months in advance, coordinated carefully with Dr. Park, essential for decisions about my ongoing care. Can't you just reschedule it? Natalie asked. I explained it wasn't that simple. Cardiac stress tests required a cardiologist, a technician, and an emergency team standing by. The next available slot was months away. Claire, she said, and her voice had that particular flatness that always preceded something that would hurt. I really need you there. This is once in a lifetime. I missed the bachelorette weekend. Mom didn't speak to me for a full week. When she finally called, she said, I hope you understand what you did to your sister. My stress test came back with results significant enough that Dr. Park scheduled an urgent follow-up the following Monday. I did not tell my family about those results right away, because I already knew it wouldn't matter. At that follow-up, Dr. Park said the words I had been quietly dreading for 2 years. She was recommending a septal myectomy, open heart surgery to remove the thickened portion of my heart muscle. Not elective. Not when you get around to it. She used the phrase significant risk of sudden cardiac death if we delayed much longer, and I sat across from her in her office thinking about how I was 28 years old and hadn't done half the things I wanted to do. The surgery slot was available in 6 weeks. Natalie's wedding was in 7. I told my parents on a Sunday. I had rehearsed what I was going to say. I sat them down at their kitchen table, the same one where, as a kid, I'd eaten cereal alone, and I explained, calmly and clearly, what Dr. Park had told me. The timeline. What significant risk of sudden cardiac death meant in practical terms. That the surgery was scheduled, and that I would likely still be recovering when the wedding took place. My father looked at the table. My mother looked at me with an expression I will never be able to fully describe, something between grief and anger, and said, Can't you push it back? Just a few weeks. Mom, I said. Did you hear what I just said? I heard you, Claire. But this is Natalie's wedding. She has been planning this for 2 years. Can you imagine what it would do to her, to look out at the aisle and not see her sister there? Can you imagine, I said, very quietly, what it would do to me to die? The silence lasted too long. You're being dramatic, Mom said finally. Doctors always make things sound worse than they are. I want to remember what I felt in that moment clearly because I think it matters. I didn't feel rage. I felt something colder and more final than rage. I felt the thing that happens when a rope you've been holding for years just releases. Not breaks. Releases. Like you simply open your hand. I called Natalie that evening. I was gentle. I was clear. I told her I loved her, that I was devastated to miss her day, that I would make it up to her every way I could. That this had been decided by my survival, not by choice. You're choosing your surgery over my wedding, she said. Natalie, it's open heart surgery. There will be photos without you in them. Videos I watch for the rest of my life, where you're not there. Do you understand that? Yes, I said. And I really hope there are videos for the rest of my life too. She hung up. 3 days before my surgery, my mother called and said, If you go through with this now, you need to understand that our family will never be the same. She said it like a warning I could still act on. Like I had a choice other than the one Dr. Park had already made for me on medical grounds. I went through with the surgery. It was on a Thursday. It lasted 6 hours. I woke up in the cardiac ICU with a breathing tube being removed from my throat, and the first thing I thought was, I'm still here. The second thing I thought was that nobody from my family had come. My best friend Maya was there. She had taken 3 days off work, driven 4 hours, and slept in a waiting room chair. She was the first face I saw. When I started crying, which, with a freshly repaired sternum, was not a comfortable experience, she held my hand and said, You're okay. You're okay. I've got you. Nobody else came. Not my parents. Not Natalie. I found out later from a cousin who felt guilty enough to text me that the wedding had gone beautifully, that everyone had a wonderful time, that my absence was noted in the most performative way possible. My mother had apparently told several guests I was dealing with some health things. Remarkable way to describe your daughter being in open heart surgery. The hospital stay was 10 days. Maya came every day she could. My friend Dominic from work brought books and bad reality TV recommendations. A neighbor I barely knew dropped off soup twice. My mother called once, on day 6. She asked how I was doing. I said I was recovering. She said, "The wedding was lovely. Natalie looked beautiful." I said I was glad. Then she said, "I hope someday you understand what you put us through." I held the phone away from my face and looked at the ceiling of my hospital room. I thought about the drainage tube still in my chest, the 6-inch scar down my sternum. The word Dr. Park had used, survived. "I have to go, Mom," I said. "I need to rest." Over the following month, she called a few more times. Each conversation followed the same pattern, a thin layer of concern stretched over a bedrock of resentment. She never once said, "I'm so glad you're alive." What she said, eventually, in what I now think of as the last real call, was, "Natalie may never forgive you." And honestly, Claire, I'm not sure I can either. That was the call where something in me shifted, not into anger. I'd already been through anger, alone in a hospital bed, into something clearer and more useful. I started taking stock. I was 28, recovering from major cardiac surgery, completely financially independent. I'd been paying my own way since college, and I had a genuine network of people who had actually shown up when it counted.
Maya. Dominic.
My neighbor with her soup. My cardiologist who had literally saved my life. In the accounting that actually mattered, I had an enormous amount. What I no longer had was the energy to keep auditioning for my family's approval. I started writing things down. Every incident. Every phone call. Every time my health had been dismissed or used as an inconvenience. The bachelorette weekend. The Sunday at the kitchen table. My mother's voice on the phone while I was still in the cardiac ICU. 2 weeks of writing. When I was done, I looked at it all and thought, I have never been the problem here. At my 6-week post-surgical follow-up, Dr. Park declared my recovery exceptional. Heart function already measurably improving. She hugged me before I left. I don't think she does that with all her patients, and said, "You made the right call. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." I drove home and cried the good kind of tears in the parking lot of a Trader Joe's. Then I started making decisions. The first was about money. Stable job, small savings, no financial ties to my family. No loans to call in. No favors owed. They had nothing to hold over me, which was the one gift my forced independence had quietly given me all along. The second was about contact. I gave myself 60 days of near silence. Not a dramatic announcement, just a quiet stepping back. Let calls go to voicemail. Replied to texts with brief, factual responses. I needed to recover physically and in every other way, and I was going to prioritize that without apology. During those 60 days, my mother texted me 7 times. Not once did any of those messages ask how I was healing. They were about family events I hadn't attended, updates on Natalie's honeymoon, a cousin's birthday party. My absence treated as inconvenient, not as something with a reason behind it. Natalie texted me once, 3 weeks after my surgery. "Mom says you're being difficult. Can you please just call her?" Not, "How are you?"
Not, "I've been thinking about you."
Just, "Can you please stop making things difficult?" I put my phone face down and went for the short, slow walk my physical therapist had prescribed. I listened to birds, felt the February air on my face, and I thought clearly and simply about what I actually wanted my life to look like. The answer came without effort. I wanted a life where I wasn't constantly making myself smaller, where I wasn't apologizing for having a body that needed medical care, where the people around me were capable of asking how I was without immediately redirecting to how my illness inconvenienced them. I wanted, very simply, to stop performing for an audience that had never really been watching me anyway. At the end of the 60 days, I called my mother. I had thought about this conversation for weeks. Talked it through with my therapist. Yes, I started therapy during my recovery, and I wish I'd done it years earlier. I knew what I wanted to say and how I wanted to say it. Not as a list of grievances recited in anger. Just as the truth, said calmly, by someone who is done being afraid of her own family. Mom answered on the second ring, guarded before I'd even said anything beyond hello.
"Claire," she said.
"I'm glad you called. I've been wanting to talk to you." "I've been wanting to talk to you too, Mom. Can I go first?" A pause. "All right." I took one breath. "I almost died," I said. I want you to actually sit with that for a moment. Not as a talking point, not as a complication to Natalie's timeline. I was 28 years old, and Dr. Park told me, in those exact words, that waiting longer could cause my sudden cardiac death. I had the surgery. I survived. And in the 10 days I was in the hospital, no one from our family came. Silence. I'm not saying this to make you feel guilty, I continued. I'm saying it because I need you to understand the actual stakes of what happened. It was easier to be angry at me than to be scared for me. I understand that. But I need you to know that I noticed. Claire, she started, you could have pushed that surgery back. No, Mom, I couldn't. Dr. Park told me that directly. And even if there had been some small chance, the fact that you expected me to take that chance for a wedding tells me something important about how this family works. That's not fair. I know you love me, I said, and I meant it. I believe that. But love that only shows up when I'm not inconveniencing anyone isn't the kind I can keep building my life around. A long silence. When she spoke again, her voice had changed. Quieter. Something cracking underneath it. I didn't know what to do, she said. Natalie was devastated. Your father and I were caught in the middle. There was no middle, Mom. There was a wedding, and there was your daughter's life. I understand it felt impossible, but that it felt like a choice at all. That's the thing I'm still working through. So, what are you saying? You're cutting us off. I'm not cutting anyone off. But I'm also not available for a relationship that asks me to minimize my own survival to keep the peace. If you and Natalie can be in my life in a way that actually includes acknowledging what happened, I want that. I want my family, but I can't keep showing up to a dynamic where I'm always the problem. She was quiet so long I thought she might have set the phone down. I don't know how to do that, she said finally. I know, I said. That's okay. I'm not asking you to fix everything tonight. I'm just telling you where I am. We said goodbye a few minutes later. Not a resolution. Not even a real ceasefire. But the first honest conversation I had ever had with my mother. I hung up and sat with that for a long time, feeling strange and light and sad, and somehow fine. 2 days later, Natalie called. I hadn't expected that. Based on everything I knew about her, I expected her to wait for our mother to handle it and show up once things were smoothed over. So when her name appeared on my screen, I straightened with attention. Hey, she said. Hey, I said. Silence. Natalie has always been less comfortable with silence than I am. Mom told me about your conversation, she said. Okay. I've been thinking about it. A pause. I've been thinking about a lot of things, actually. I waited. I didn't call you, she said quietly. In the hospital. I know that. I told myself it was because the wedding was insane, and you had people, and she stopped. When she started again, her voice was smaller. I think I was angry, which is a terrible thing to be when your sister is in surgery, and I know that. Something complicated was happening in my chest, the working kind, not the broken kind. I don't know how to be sorry enough for that, Natalie said. I don't think sorry covers it. But I wanted you to know that I know. I wasn't ready to absolve her. I wasn't there yet, and I wasn't going to pretend otherwise. But I heard something in her voice I hadn't heard in years. Someone seeing themselves clearly and not running from it. I appreciate you calling, I said. Can we talk more? Actually talk. Not through Mom. Yeah, I said. I think we can do that. It wasn't forgiveness. It was a door, cracked open, which was more than I had expected. The aftermath didn't look like victory in any dramatic sense. No shouting matches, no courtrooms, no cinematic parking lot confrontation. Real life rarely works that way. What happened was quieter, and in its own way, more complete. My parents spent about 3 months in a kind of stunned withdrawal. Then slowly, the phone calls changed. Stilted at first, careful and strange. But the conversations began to include questions that were actually questions. How are you feeling? How's the recovery going? How is work? Small things. But genuinely small, not small in that way where the smallness is the point. Natalie and I started having lunch once a month. The first few were awkward. Years of dynamic don't dissolve over sandwiches. But she was trying, visibly and effortfully, and that counted for something with me. She asked about my cardiology appointments now. Remembered them. Once, she texted me the morning of a follow-up and said, "Thinking of you today," and I sat in the waiting room and cried the quiet kind of tears. What I noticed in all of this was that the family I got back, slowly, imperfectly, through conversations that felt like carefully disarming something explosive, was better than the one I'd had before.
Because it was honest now.
Because I had, by refusing to absorb punishment for surviving, forced something real to exist between us. Not everyone came back. A few extended family members had been told a version of events where I was the villain, and some were content to keep believing it. I let that go. Some bridges don't need rebuilding. My career was going well. Maya and I started taking weekend hiking trips, slowly, carefully, with my heart functioning the way it was supposed to. Dominic and I started a book club that really just became an excuse to eat Thai food and talk for 3 hours. I adopted Ren from a shelter where he'd been overlooked because he was 7 years old and a little awkward, and he immediately became the primary love of my life. I began to understand what it felt like to live in a life that actually fit me. Now, 3 years later, I sometimes think back to that parking lot, sitting alone after that scary appointment, hearing my mother pivot from my test results to Natalie's engagement, and I don't feel the hurt of it anymore. Exactly. I feel something more like clarity. Like that moment was a data point I wasn't ready to read yet, but was quietly storing for later. I don't regret any of it. Not the surgery, obviously, I'm alive, and alive is not a small thing. But also not the hard conversations, not the months of distance, not the discomfort of telling my mother the truth about what our relationship had actually been. Those things were necessary. They were the part of recovery no one had on the discharge checklist. My parents and I are genuinely closer now than we ever were before. Not because they became different people overnight, but because the relationship finally has honesty in it, and honesty is what allows closeness to actually be closeness instead of just proximity. Last year, sitting in her kitchen at that same table, my mother said to me, "I think I failed you when you needed us most, and I'm going to have to live with that." Then she just looked at her coffee. I didn't tell her it was okay, because it wasn't fully. But I told her I believed her, and that I was still there, and that mattered to me more than I expected. Natalie is pregnant now, and calls me more than she ever has in our lives. Sometimes I'm the one she calls first when something scares her. I don't take that for granted. Neither does she, I think. If you're in something like what I was in, if you have a family that has made a habit of treating your needs as an inconvenience, if you have been the capable one, and the responsible one, and the one who can always handle it for so long that you've started to believe it yourself, I want you to know one thing. You are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to need things. You are allowed to make the choice that keeps you alive, even when the people who are supposed to love you most ask you not to. Your survival is not a burden you owe anyone an apology for. I'm 31, and my heart works now, the mechanical kind, and I think the other kind too. I sit by my window in the mornings with Ren in my lap, and I watch the light come through my herbs, and I think, I'm still here. That's everything.